Okay, we're back. So, um, part of the whole this initiative horizon is actually prioritizing our solution components, and there are a number of different ways that you can use to prioritize components. We've identified a goodly number of them, and this is something that you're going to need to consider, that prioritization might be different based on any of these specific perspectives, and we're going to have to say, okay, we're prioritizing our components, but this is how we're going to prioritize them. What we're going to use as a basis for prioritizing them. And we always want to be producing the most valuable components, but the basis for determining what that value is can be very different at different points in time, and so it just makes the analysis just a little bit more complicated, because we can't just look at it from one perspective. And you may really have to, in terms of your project or your initiative, you may really have to look at it and prioritize your components in a number of different ways, and then look for the balance that says, we have our prioritization from all these different perspectives, and based on the combination of those perspectives, this is what we feel is the optimal delivery plan for these components. Understanding that your stakeholders, each of your individual stakeholders, may have a different perspective, or a slightly different perspective, or a different set of information based on the same perspective. I can think right off the top of my head of if you're looking at prioritizing components based on cost, if your company works on a system where costs are allocated to functional areas, each functional area, as it's impacted by the components of a solution, will have a different cost, and so from the cost perspective, it may look very different from different stakeholders, and they may be pushing for their own agenda in terms of what should be the prioritization, where everybody is still considering this on a cost basis, but the cost is different to various different areas. So it's the traditional business analysis answer is always, it depends. It depends on who you're talking to and their perspective, and you need to factor that into to your discussions. Okay. So we've got a whole variety of different aspects that we can look at for prioritizing components. Continual reprioritization, and this is again saying that the initiative horizon, although it deals at a specific level, at the specific decision-making level for a particular initiative, it doesn't go away. It's always there, and if we're prioritizing things as a part of this horizon, as we get additional information, we're going to have to factor that in, and we're going to have to reprioritize this. It's always about how do we deliver the next most important piece of this solution that's feasible and doable. Again, we don't want to be this doesn't want to become I'm not going to say a never-ending process, because it is a never-ending process. It is continuous, but at the same time, you have to add some good judgment into this, so that if there are major changes in the potential value of specific components, then you might want to reprioritize things. But if once you get beyond a certain level, it doesn't make sense to juggle things just for the sake of being sure that you always have the optimal prioritization. some point you're going to have to say, we're going to make a trade-off here. It's not worth the extra pain, the extra cost, the extra time, whatever, to rejuggle the schedule. We're not going to gain that much additional value from it. So it becomes a matter of judgment. You have to constantly be looking at it, but you don't want to be constantly tweaking it without good cause. Determining if the need is satisfied. Again, as we deliver components of our solution, we want to be assessing those components and saying, okay, well, we're doing this initiative in order to satisfy a need, and it's not necessarily clear that everything that we've laid out for our solution is going to be necessary in order for us to satisfy the need, or in order for us to satisfy the need to a level that is acceptable to us, or acceptable to our organization. And so what we need to do is to be assessing the solution, assessing the performance of the solution as it's being delivered, and determining whether or not the higher level business need has been satisfied acceptably, at which point we say, okay, well, we don't need to do this anymore. This is particularly relevant in the agile environment, where solutions are being delivered piece by piece, where need is being met piece by piece. In a more predictive waterfall environment, it would be, well, we don't have to assess things. We won't assess things until the entire solution is delivered. Ergo, this kind of thing the only thing that we would have to assess at in that sort of thing is, did we meet the need? And that's simply a yes or no answer. If you're in a predictive waterfall environment, it would be, do we need a new project in order to address this need? In the agile environment, it's about as we deliver different pieces of value, we make an assessment as to whether or not the particular initiative needs to continue, as opposed to whether we need a new initiative to achieve or to satisfy the need. And that information, obviously there is a project team that's involved with this, but theoretically there is a product owner and sponsor who are responsible, sponsor more than even the product owner, sponsor who is responsible for making a determination that says the need has been met, and therefore we can cancel or we can close out the project. And the goal here is that the various members of the team and the people who are working on this and people who are working with this are feeding information up to that person, so that person has the information that they need in order to make a decision as to whether the business need for the organization has been satisfied. This should be happening every time we deliver more of the solution. We're in an environment where in the agile mode, we're constantly delivering different pieces of the solution. Those pieces of the solution are intended to add value to the organization, so that every time we deliver a piece, part of the delivery of that piece, or part of the follow-up to the delivery of that piece, is, have we accomplished what we need, or sufficient amount of what we need to accomplish in order to make changes, and in that particular case, determining whether we need to stop, but also determining whether we're adding value at the rate we thought we were going to add it. Do we need to change things? All of those decisions. And ultimately, longer term, once we determine that the specific need that we were trying to address has been met, the follow-on to that is that we can then take our resources and basically reallocate our resources to doing something else that will help to satisfy um, another need. Ongoing assessment of the viability of the solution, and then this is all. It's just kind of more of the same. We've delivered components of the solution, and we're assessing those components to see how they're delivering value. And so at the same time, we need to be assessing the overall solution to determine whether the solution has delivered the value that it was supposed to be delivering, whether we've gotten the outcome that we wanted, or at least moved far enough along the path towards the initial outcome that we're satisfied that assessing or allocating more resources, expending more resources is not going to get us significantly further, or get us further in the sense that it's makes it valuable for us to expend those resources. And this is an overall picture of things. This goes back to assessing on the identified measures of success. If we don't have those measures of success, we can't really determine whether we've met the needs. If we don't understand exactly what performance is going to indicate to us that we've met the needs, we can't really assess whether we've met the needs. And obviously it's all based on information, a constant stream of information, both from the upstream perspective, the strategy perspective, and the downstream perspective, the delivery perspective. So what happens if we find that things are not going the way we want them to go? Well, this is the horizon. This is the perspective where we make determinations as to how are we going to address the fact that our solution is not giving us what we thought it was going to give us. This is where we say, okay, can we get where we need to go if we change things? Can we get where we need to go if we add some more component, add some more delivery to the solution, add something new, add something different? This is where we get to say we've prioritized our components. We have a roadmap for our components. Does that roadmap still make sense? Or do we need to change that roadmap? So not do we need to change the components, but do we just need to change the order in which those components are delivered? That can sometimes make a big difference. I had mentioned previously that if something changes in the environment, there's a significant likelihood that the roadmap that we put together for the initial delivery of the product may not continue to be valid. That may change, so it may just be that we're not changing anything about the solution except for the sequence in which that solution is going to be delivered. That's a valid outcome of doing work at the initiative horizon. And obviously, if we determine that we have either met the need or not met the need, we have the option to say, okay, it's time to stop. We don't want to go down the road of, well, we've committed to this, so we have to continue it at all costs. That's something that actually frequently or regularly happened in the waterfall environment, because things were being delivered on such a bulk, one-shot, one-and-done kind of delivery kind of thing, where it was very easy to not be able to make a decision as to whether to continue with the project or not continue with the project. And so a lot of projects went down the death march spiral of, well, we started this and we've got to finish it, because there was no mechanism there to say we can look in the middle of
a project and determine whether or not this project will provide us with the business outcome that we wanted. Um, Obviously, there are some cases where that could and should have happened anyway, but there were a lot of cases because there was nothing tangible that was being assessed where that assessment couldn't be made. In an agile environment, we have the opportunity because we're delivering things, we've delivered things, so we can always assess how well the things that we've delivered are performing or have performed, and we have the option to say, let's cut our losses and run. Let's just not continue with this. Let's cancel right now and recover the resources that we would expend if we continued to do this. The time frame for the initiative horizon, it's obviously it is shorter than the strategy horizon. It is longer than the delivery horizon. It depends a lot on the scope of the initiative, the magnitude of the initiative. There are some initiatives that are going to be where the initiative horizon and actually all three horizons, for a small enough initiative where all three horizons may be in the same time frame, but with slight differences. In general, we think of the initiative horizon in a couple of months, in terms of a couple of months. So long-term strategy horizon tends to be in the many months, years level, where initiatives, particularly if we're dealing agile, where we're delivering on shorter time frames, you're probably talking in the 1 to 3 months. So a couple of delivery sequences should be what we're looking at, and we're always looking at this in a moving downstream, so that it's not just 1 to 3 months from the start of a project, it's 1 to 3 months from where we are right now. Some issues that we need to deal with in terms of the initiative horizon. What are we trying to get to? Again, this is about sequencing things. It's because we're delivering in pieces and chunks and delivering constantly. We may be addressing the outcomes that we're looking for differently. We may have several different things that we're trying to accomplish, or several different things that we will accomplish based on what we're delivering. And so we always need to look at, for the specific pieces that we're delivering right now, what are we trying to get to, versus a little bit further on down the road, when we've delivered this first piece, what are we going to be looking at next? And then longer term, what will we be looking at down the road? And this all goes together to basically deliver a roadmap for our solution. That's one of the primary things that we're looking for at this particular horizon, is what is the roadmap. Okay, we've said that one of the things that we're basing the work in the initiative horizon on is feedback from the other horizons. We've talked a bit already about the strategy horizon, so that we should always be looking to see whether what we're delivering in this initiative aligns with the strategy that has been determined, the longer-term strategy that's been determined. In the same way, we need to be looking at, okay, how is what we're talking about right now impacted by the day-to-day or the shorter-term deliveries that we have already achieved or are working towards achieving. The delivery horizon gives us because it's where the product is actually delivered, the solution is actually delivered and put into use. That's where we get to make the assessments on is the solution doing what we thought that it was going to do? Is it doing it to the level that we thought it was going to do it? Um, those sorts of pieces of information. Um, do we have everything that we need? Have we seen, based on what we've delivered, has that changed our perspective of what we need to be working on? So all of that feedback coming from the assessment that's done at the delivery horizon, or in the context of the delivery horizon, feeds back to the initiative horizon to make a determination as to whether our component mix is still appropriate and as to whether our sequencing and timing is still appropriate. And this just highlights the fact that if we're delivering in sequence, if we're delivering pieces, I'm going to say one piece at a time, but that's not, it's one chunk at a time, could be a couple of pieces in a chunk. We're still looking and saying we need to be assessing as we deliver those pieces, as we put those pieces into play. There needs to be an assessment of how are we doing, what is happening in our organization as a result of having delivered these pieces, and using that information to inform as to what we do next, or what we indeed have to even consider doing. And that applies to everything that we do. All of the components that we put out, we should be assessing to say, did it do what we thought that it was going to do? What is it doing? And how well is it doing it? Feedback to the strategy horizon. Well, as you know, as we deliver on an initiative, that initiative could have an impact on the organization. Certainly, we want to feed that back. Presumably, in an organization, the strategy kind of controls multiple initiatives. We're not always going to be working on one thing at a time in an organization. There are usually a lot of projects going on at the same time, a lot of initiatives going on at the same time, and each one of those initiatives really could have an impact on any or all of the other initiatives, even if it's only in terms of available resources. One of the things that we had was that in the healthcare company, a lot of the initiatives involved the same resources from the business side of the house. The same key players were always involved, and that meant that there was always a competition for the availability of those key players. So in this particular paradigm, you would be looking at it and saying each initiative needs to inform back to the organization that says, well, based on what's going on in my initiative, I've been able to free up some of those key resources, or I've been able to basically sideline some of those key resources so that they're now available to work on other initiatives. Or conversely, my initiative needs more time, more resources from those key resources, and if I take those, if those resources are allocated to my initiative, it means they're not going to be able to be allocated to other initiatives, and those other initiatives are going to have to accommodate that. So it becomes a much more complex picture, and that depends a lot on your organization and how your organization, the resources that it has available, and the way those resources are allocated. I would kind of want to argue that in the best of all possible worlds, there were enough available resources. The capability, the resource capability was not concentrated so heavily on a few key resources that things stopped moving when those few key resources were not available. It would be nice and optimal in organizations if the capabilities were spread more across the organization, so that there were multiple resources who could serve as a key resource for these different initiatives. That's an organizational thing. It just depends on the environment that you're working in. So we've got our principles of agile business analysis, and we basically said that these principles, these high-level principles, operate at each of the different horizons. And one of the things that you're going to need to know for the exam is really how these principles operate at the different horizons. That's kind of one of the keys to the whole exam, is understanding that even though you've got the same things going on, the same principles apply. In some cases, we'll see even the same techniques might apply. You need to understand at what level you're thinking and what the perspective is that you're trying to achieve, so that you can say, okay, well, this is how this particular principle applies at this particular horizon. So, let's start this out. See the whole. We're talking about always having a good vision of what the overall picture is, being able to see the big picture. And because at the strategy horizon, we're looking at, we're actively looking at the overall picture for the organization. At the initiative horizon, we're looking at a smaller subset of that, but we're always looking at that subset in the context of the overall big picture. And we're actually always looking at that subset in the context of the pieces that make up the smaller pieces, which is the delivery horizon. So we are looking at having information from both the strategy horizon and the delivery horizon. We're looking at having feedback from both those horizons and factoring that into our vision, or our perspective that we're looking at the current time. Seeing the whole, because we've got a list of components, because we've broken our solution down into smaller pieces, smaller components, we still need to be mindful of how each of those components is going to impact the upstream, the overall picture, and the downstream, the direct delivery, the direct delivery of the product. And so this is the horizon where that gets combined and we make those decisions. We still need to be mindful of the overall solution and what it's going to achieve, but this is where the decisions internal to that overall picture are made. So we need to have that in mind. And then obviously what we're looking at in terms of our solution performance is, have we met the needs that we set out to? Have we achieved the business outcomes that we set out to? And hence we make decisions on components that have or have not been delivered. But it's all in the context of the overall product delivery. Think as a customer. Okay. Well, since we're looking at this as the horizon, we're making decisions on what will be delivered and what will be delivered in what sequence. The thing that we should be mindful here is the goal is to deliver value to the customer. So obviously there are going to be some pieces of an initiative that are foundational to the ability to deliver value to the customer, and we need to be mindful of those pieces. But overall, the goal is to deliver value to the customer. So as we're delivering pieces of our solution, we should be constantly looking at this from the perspective of how is the customer going to, how is the person who is going to have to use this solution going to be impacted by what we've delivered. And as the people who are responsible for prioritizing things, making decisions, those decisions should really be based on information that is coming from the people that are going to have to use the solution. How will they feel about it? Valuable, obviously, to get feedback from those people. That's a little bit, I guess, easier from the perspective of when you're working on internal solutions, when you're working on solutions for people who are a part of your organization. It's probably a little bit easier to get to request and get feedback based on what you've delivered. Little harder to get feedback from external customers, although I could see a situation where your marketing people, your salespeople would be able to say, if you're delivering a product, a product that is not necessarily the full product, or the long-term overall goal, you can measure how well that product is being received by the ability of your marketing and your salespeople to sell that to your customers, to your direct customers, your direct clients. They should be able to provide you with some feedback on that, on their ability to basically use this solution. So you're still looking at it from the perspective of the ultimate customer of your solution. It's just you may have to find information from different sources. Do I have more than one customer for this solution component? Different people may use this solution in different ways. There may be components that you've delivered that certain people won't use. Certainly in terms of commercial type products, whether or not how people use the product changes based on their needs, and so you may find that there are certain customers or certain users of the solution that are really happy with, excited and happy about things that you've delivered, and you may have customers who feel like, well, I don't really care because I don't really use that. So you need to be mindful of that, but you still need to be making your decisions of what to deliver and when to deliver it based on the people who are going to have to use your solution. Think as a customer, part of that is again getting information, from the people who are using it, and the concept of agile delivery as being rapid and frequent. That's probably again also a little bit easier to achieve in an internal environment when your solutions are working internally than it is when you're developing commercial products. Commercial products, I would argue that customers of commercial products don't necessarily like to see things changing on a regular basis. I think we've all been kind of groomed into that a little bit with the constant stream of delivery from people like Microsoft. It's almost become like, yeah, it just keeps happening, or in the mobile marketplace, the Android people, the Apple people are constantly delivering things, and I think as a world at this point, we're moving towards the environment that things are going to be constantly changing. So we've become perhaps a little bit more accepting of that concept. It still comes down to when we're delivering, when we're producing and delivering, we should be always mindful of how the things that we're delivering are going to impact directly on our customers. I know that there are times when I look at it and say, oh, geez, something happened. Something was delivered to my device auto-magically, and now something's changed, and it's something that I wasn't aware of, something I wasn't aware was coming, and it's kind of thrown me in for a loop. Um, as a solution producer, you need to be mindful of those kinds of things. And even though you need to be delivering rapidly and frequently because you're delivering in small chunks, because you don't want to wait for a long period of time to put out something new, you need to be mindful of the impacts of the kind of chaos that you're creating with your customers. Analyze to determine what is valuable at the initiative horizon. Well, this is where we're making decisions as to what's going to be delivered, what chunks are going to be delivered, and what sequence they're going to be delivered. And those decisions should always be based on the idea of what we're trying to do is to deliver value to our customers. So we need to be taking feedback from them to say, how has the pieces of the product that we've delivered to you, how has that improved your value or improved your perception of value with our product, and feeding that back and looking at what is coming and what we're working on and saying, how can we make a determination to say, okay, this is the next most valuable thing. We have to be constantly asking what is valuable. So at this level, we're looking at prioritizing solution components, basically determining whether or not solution components whether or not we even need to consider producing specific solution components based on our perception of what will add value to our solution, what will be valuable to our customers. Get real using examples. So all of our decisions, the decisions that we're making about these things really should be based on the best possible information, the most realistic information that we have. They should be based on the feedback that we're getting from the people who are using our solution. This is basically where we need to be going with this. One of the ones here is looking at the basic identifying and assessing scenarios, different possibilities for the use of our solution, for the use of our product, and saying what we need to be doing is looking at the most common scenarios, the most common uses of the product in order to determine what should be happening next. It should be based on an assessment that says, well, in 80% of the circumstances that we need to be using this application, this product, this is what we're going to be doing with it, and this is how we're going to be doing that. So if we can identify that 80%, then that's where we want to focus our initial efforts to say we've got to have those most common scenarios covered before we start worrying about the outliers. This tends to be a problem in a lot of organizations and with a lot of stakeholders, because stakeholders tend to kind of gloss over the things that they do all the time and just assume that those things are going to be covered, and they tend to worry about the outliers, assuming that those outliers can't be handled or are going to cause a problem when they show up. There tends to be a focus there on that, and I certainly have experienced that in my career, where people have said where we've started to try and analyze functionality that we needed to deliver and ask the people how often this functionality was used, and found out that it was basically almost never used, but when it was needed, it was problematic. And so then it became a balancing act of is it worth expending the resources to accommodate a scenario that happens only once every couple of months, just because that scenario is a troublesome scenario when it does occur. That's always a balancing act, and from the Agile perspective, certainly you want to be looking at the things that people are going to have to do most of the time to be able to satisfy those things as rapidly as possible, and then assume that further on down the road you can deal with the outliers. That's that's just the nature of the beast. The one caveat to that is that you also need to be mindful of the scenarios or the circumstances where if you don't have a specific set of functionality, even if it's a kind of an outlier functionality where people won't be able to use your solution, that's something to be mindful of, so that when you're assessing these things, you have to say, is this something that I need? This applies a lot to foundational kinds of things. If we don't have a data storage structure that can be used by people, well, they're not going to be able to do anything with our application, because it just doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't do anything. That's not a, quote, scenario that you need to deal with. It's just an underlying constraint. And so you need to make sure that those constraints are met, and then be looking at how the solution is going to be used, and accommodating the scenarios that are there, and being practical about them. Just saying, we really need to understand exactly what's going on here, exactly how this is going to be dealt with, how it's going to be used. Those are the examples that we need, and we use those examples to make decisions. That's the information that we need to make decisions on what to do and when to do it. Just understanding what is doable. Okay. One of the things that we always need to be mindful of when we're looking at building solutions and when we're looking at initiatives is, can we do this? Do we have the resources? Do we have the time? Do we have the money? Do we have the skills? This is stuff that we need to be assessing in terms of the viability of delivering specific components or specific solutions. It's always a question, and it should inform the decisions. If we can't do something, we shouldn't expend the resources to try and do it. We should be practical about it and say, at this particular point in time, for whatever reason, this particular piece of the solution is not doable, or this particular solution is not doable. Obviously, this feeds back from the delivery horizon. Can our delivery team make this happen for whatever reasons, whether that's resources, whether it's technology, whatever. This information about what can we do needs to feed back to the decisions that we make on what and when to do. Stimulate collaboration and continuous improvement. Well, this is always, the whole idea of all of this is that we're constantly looking for feedback on things. We're constantly making decisions based on information and feedback that's coming based on what we've done and what we're doing. So it's a continuous loop of getting the information, using the information, making decisions, moving forward, delivering something, getting the information, using the information to make decisions. It's a constant loop, and that the information that goes into that comes from a variety of sources. It's based on the obviously a lot of it is based on the people that are using your solutions, but it's based on the people that are using your solutions, the people that are building your solutions, and the people who are making decisions about the solutions that need to be built. So we've got this basic supply of information that's coming to us, and the goal is to transmit that information upward to the appropriate people that need to make decisions, so that they have the best and most accurate and most current information in order to be able to make their decisions on what needs to be done. Agile teams in terms of collaboration and continuous improvement. Obviously, at this level, we're mostly looking at using the information that's coming from the downstream streams, from the customers and from the people who are doing the work, the delivery teams. That is, those people and that information all needs to be coming together to feed up to the people who are making the decisions about which components to deliver and in what sequence to deliver those components. That is all based on the value that's been delivered, the outcomes that have been achieved, and basically the Agile team is looking at that to say, okay, have we satisfied the business need? Ergo, have we done what we need to do in order for our solution to be successful? And at the initiative horizon, we're looking again at, should we continue to do we need to continue with delivering pieces of our solution? Do we need to change our solution either in terms of what's being delivered or in what sequence it's being delivered, or are we done and can we cancel and stop and reallocate our resources? Part of this, part of the whole Agile paradigm in most of the flavors, certainly that I know of, is to be taking the time to look at what we've done and look at how that needs to change and adapt. In terms of certainly the Scrum paradigm, the classic or the Scrum activity is retrospectives, where the team gets together and basically spends some time at the end of an iteration, not only to review the deliverables from that iteration in terms of determining whether or not those deliverables are successful, but in terms of looking at the process of creating those deliverables and saying, asking the questions that says, is our process what it needs to be? So part of the whole Agile paradigm is not only about, is our product what it needs to be, but is our process what it needs to be? Are there things that we should be doing that we're not doing? Are there things that we're doing that we should not be doing? Do we need to change in order to basically deliver value more efficiently to our ultimate customers? Those are retrospectives. The time needs to be taken. In the old waterfall paradigm, it was the lessons learned. I used to say it was the lessons exposed, because I didn't think that we ever really learned anything. And in the Agile paradigm, there is a big focus on that, and saying we should be looking at it and not saying we just continue to do it the way we've always done it. We should always be looking at the way we've done things to determine whether or not that is appropriate. I would argue that we don't want to agonize about this. We don't want it to be, nitpicking. Certainly in terms of retrospectives, one of the things that tends to happen is that teams fall into the blame game, where it's not how can we fix things and make them better, but who is responsible for what didn't work. That's not an optimal way of doing things. It is one of the dangers that you need to be mindful of in operating in this environment, and particularly in an agile environment where this is done more consistently, where it's done more frequently. If your team has the tendency to be looking at how to place blame for things, it's not going to be a happy circumstance. The idea of doing retrospectives, of looking at the process should be totally intended in a positive way, so that even if we identify things that we did wrong or we should not be doing, the goal is not to use those as excuses or reasons why we didn't succeed, but rather look at them as impediments to even to our success. The goal is to say, you know what, we want this to be the best and most comfortable environment that it can possibly be, and if there's something that's getting in the way of that, we should look at changing that, and look at changing that as a team. Avoid waste. Oh, 11 o'clock. Okay, we've got through another hour here. Avoid waste. Well, waste is about doing things that we shouldn't be doing, producing things that we shouldn't be producing, just basically expending resources for no good reason. At this level, at the horizon level, one of the key things to avoiding waste is understanding what we can possibly do. If we can't do it, if it's not going to be successful, then we shouldn't try. We should say, okay, well, we need to look at what can we do to make what we wanted to do doable. It's not currently doable. How can we change things? How can we change either what we want to deliver or how we deliver it in order to be able to make it doable? We don't want to waste resources. And that's primarily based on information. If we have information, a variety of sources of information, we need to factor that information, use that information to determine what really needs to be done and what makes sense to do in order to deliver value. How do we avoid waste? Well, if we understand how what we're delivering produces value, if we understand clearly what is our intended outcome and how the pieces that we're delivering will impact that intended outcome, then we can make an informed decision that says if it's not going to if it's not going to contribute to our desired outcome, then we should consider not doing it. We should make a decision to not do it if we're clearly and firmly convinced that it will not produce the desired outcome or not contribute to the desired outcome. At a macro level, if the solution is not going to satisfy the need, then we should basically not do it. We should stop doing it. We should recover those resources and reallocate those resources to doing something that actually does need to be done. And if we're able to and successfully manage to measure the outcomes that we've produced, and we determine that we actually have basically achieved our goals, then we can make an informed decision that says either we should revise our goals in line with our solution and say we can take advantage of this solution, we can extend this solution even further to achieve other goals, to basically travel the same path but do a better job of it. That's valid. That's certainly a valid decision to make, but it's also a valid decision to make to say, you know what, we hit our goal, and that means we should just stop now and look at something else. Factor that back into our strategy decisions that say, okay, well, we have more available resources now. What do we do with those available resources? This is again about making informed decisions, having information, having current information, and being able to apply that information to the back up to the strategy level, and at the same time also looking at the initiative level. Have we delivered all of the components that we intended to deliver, and there is actually nothing more that we can or should be doing? Or do we still have more that's in the pipeline that we could do, but because we've delivered what we needed to deliver and nobody wants us to deliver anymore, should we put this on the back burner and say, okay, well, it's there, but we're not gonna work on it because we don't need to work on it? Or, on the negative side, have we determined that we're not going to get to where we wanted to go, and additional work is not going to help us to do this? All of this is about efficiently and effectively allocating or expending resources, whether those resources are human resources, financial resources, technological resources, whatever. They're resources, and we should be looking and saying, you know what, this is not needed. At this level, we're talking basically component delivery. So there's I'm thinking in terms of the analysis process. Do we need to do any more analysis on what's going on in terms of the components, the solution, the viability, the feasibility? Feasibility probably should already have been established, but for anything new that we're planning on doing, do we need to make that assessment? Do we need to expend the resources to make an assessment, or do we have enough information so that strategically we can decide where we're going with this particular initiative? That's it. So that actually brings us to the end of the slides for this particular section. It is now just about 10 after the hour. We're moving along pretty rapidly. I'm going to move over into, actually for the remainder of the time that we're here, I'm going to look at some of the, from the study guide, some of the techniques that are involved or allocated at this. I probably want to a little further take a look at some of the information that's on the Succeed platform in terms of the flashcards that are available, that stuff, the questions that are available, the question banks. You should have access to the question banks for these, and we'll probably do a quick run through of those kinds of things. I also have I've put together a spreadsheet that I call my Agile Extension spreadsheet that really lays all of the information out in a more tabular kind of format. I think I want to take a look at that with you guys to see if you think that this would be useful for you. Itoma, I mentioned to Leon that I sent you guys an email this morning. I've started to put together what I think are some useful additional study materials based on the Quizlet platform, which is kind of it's an extension of the Succeed platform. I sent you guys an invitation to that so that you have access to the couple of extra sets of study materials that I have um, prepared, and may want to take a little bit of a look at that. So a lot of the rest of the time today is going to be spent in that direction, just drilling into some of these things to help you along with the exam preparation. Okay. So I'm going to suggest it's 11 after the hour. I'm going to suggest taking probably another 10-minute break here. So let's go for 20 after the hour and come back and we'll start up again.